Welcome. I'm Pastor Jeff, and this is Coffee Cup Conversation. We're in our third installment. We decided to do the first four on our vision goals of Just As You Are, which is a church here in Stone Mountain Village. Today we have with us again Cheryl, and she is the associate pastor / music minister at Just As You Are, and we have Father Alex Gatan, and he has become very quickly, since meeting him in this community, he has become a dear friend. However, he's leaving. So he's actually being transferred to another parish, and we wish him well, but we wanted to see if we could get him on here before he left town, because I think you'll find his insights quite wonderfully enlightening. So the next vision goal that we're talking about is our third vision goal, which is to be transformed by our faith into radically inclusive expressions of God's unconditional love, regardless of who or where people are in God's diverse creation. Before we get into that, though, when this was first written some 10 years ago, it was actually this: be unapologetically Christian in expressing the unconditional love of God for all people, regardless of who or where you are in God's diverse creation. The phrase that I always stumbled over was unapologetically Christian, because, I don't know, does that seem kind of confrontational to you? Unapologetically, in their face? And the reason, I want to read something that's on our website that just kind of brought the change into radically inclusive. Does it seem like religion is all about condemnation and hate? Are you discouraged with organized religion using the Bible as a weapon? Have you or a loved one been told by a religious leader that you're not in God's good grace and you're going to hell? Somewhere, somehow, in the world of religion, the Bible, this love letter from God, has been transformed into hate mail. The good news of Jesus Christ was changed from a message of relationship to one of restrictions, from community to one of conformity, from whosoever to whom we decide. The unconditional love and acceptance of God is not restricted by our religious denomination, national origin, marital status, gender, sexual orientation, or any other human-derived division. We invite you to join us in reclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ as the message of God's unconditional love for all people, regardless of whom or where you are in God's diverse creation. There are no ifs, no ands, no buts. There's only a just as you are. So in that paragraph that we use to introduce the church, we say we're reclaiming the gospel. When you hear the word the gospel of Jesus Christ, what does that word gospel mean to you? And I'll start with you, because I know what she's going to say.
Well, thank you. I think it's just going back to our roots, who we are as believers, and I kept thinking about what you said about an apologetic, but probably from a different perspective, and I will connect it with the gospel, because Jesus was unapologetic.
True.
And he was, we're hungry. It's Sabbath, but we're hungry. What comes first, And I think that's what it means. Gospel means being there for the other at any time, and sometimes to the extreme. And the problem is, like, after many years, religions, and especially Christian religions, have become more attached to a set of rules than to the gospel. So that's the problem. I think it's a problem. So I will be unapologetic all the time. For example, when some people in certain religions, and I put example as the Catholic Church, they say, okay, if you're divorced or you're in this state of your life, you cannot go to confession or to the sacrament of reconciliation. I said, where is that written? It's not even a law. It's not even a law. When we have to have the freedom to reconcile with God and with others at any time. How is it that I will put a wall you know. And I think that's and I will be unapologetic to anybody, even a bishop or whomever, that tells me that that's a rule, because it's not, you know.
See why I love
Yeah.
him?
So I will be unapologetic, and I say, like, show me, you know, where is this rule that you're inventing, you know. Welcome all the ones who are divorced, who are, you know, probably looking for God in their lives, you know. Just come here. That's what it is there for. That the grace of God, it's an open source.
See, now, I like that use of the word unapologetic.
Yes.
I guess what made me feel comfortable in our use of it was unapologetically Christian. So it's in Christian being a set of dogma and theologies, which I think, well, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead without asking you what you think the gospel is.
You're fine. Well, you did know. I know you know what because we grew up kind of the same, but it just is the good news. The good news about God's love and how much He cares for us, and that He'll meet us wherever we are.
That's true. The word gospel comes from the German, I think it's good Spiel. I'm not German, which means good news, and it's just a transliteration. The thing of it is, I was struck not too long ago with the fact that I grew up in a tradition. The gospel was Jesus died, was buried, rose again. Well, that is good news. However, when I hear the good news of Jesus Christ, I go back, what was Jesus proclaiming? And Jesus wasn't proclaiming that. That's what we proclaim after the fact. What Jesus was proclaiming was the kingdom of God is closer than you realize. Repent, change the way you think. The kingdom of God is closer than you realize. And, well, anyway, we decided after, it was probably 5 years into it, we decided that we needed to move beyond defining our faith with a word and allowing our faith to transform us. And that's why we came up with be transformed by our faith into radically inclusive expressions of God's love. And I remember when we went through this, about every 3 years I'll go through this series at Just As You Are, just to remind everybody, you know, this is the culture of who we are. And I asked this question, is it really possible to be radically inclusive? And then I qualify, I said, before you answer, who's the last person on earth that you would want to see walk through that door right now? Could you be a radically inclusive expression of God's love to that person? Is it truly possible for us to be radically inclusive expressions of God's love? I mean, is it an unrealistic goal?
I don't think so.
Why not?
I don't think it's unrealistic at all, because if we're growing and being who we're supposed to be, which is seeing people not with our opinions and our, as you put it, walls and rules and regulations, but seeing them as through God's eyes, or trying our best to do that, then you can see in everyone that God wants everyone. He calls everyone. And so, and I thought of the person, there is one person that I would love to not see, but who could at any time walk through our doors. And if he does, I will, and I know I will, welcome him with open arms.
That's funny because this last week's sermon was about God seeks that which has been driven away. It was from Ecclesiastes 3. God seeks that which is driven away. Well, in 1 John 4, verse 20 and 21, it says, if anyone says, I love God, but hates, and I'm going to put the Greek word here, and I'll explain that in a minute. If anyone says, I love God, and hates his adelphos, he is a liar. For he who does not love his adelphos, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And this is the commandment we have from him. Whoever loves God must also love his adelphos. We all know the word is usually translated brother, right? Brother. And to me, it's how we define that word brother. And it was struck home to me that this is such a very important point in all of Christianity, because in the New English translation, that's like, it's along the same scholarship as the King James. It's the New English translation. It's a more collegiate level of reading. And it's very they say that they're much word to word. There are some that are phrase to phrase. This is a word to word translation. They translate it. I'm going to read it the way it reads. Anyone says they love God and hates his fellow believer, he is a liar, for whom he does not love his fellow believer whom he has seen. That changes the meaning to me. I don't know. What about you?
Well, actually, it does. And somehow it's restrictive and it's not inclusive.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
sorry to say
Well,
it.
no, because
Sorry
the
to say
contemporary
it.
English version, because it's
Yeah.
contemporary English version, translated others. Whoever does not love others.
Mhm.
To me, I'm more comfortable with that translation
course.
because I think it's how you define. It's basically back to the Garden of Eden, or no? Yeah, where's your brother? Am I my brother's keeper?
Yeah.
Who is your brother?
Mhm.
Who is your brother?
The way you defined it a minute ago, to me, is exactly what I was taught growing up, that your brother are the other believers that you know. And we were very inclusive, so was the other believers who believe exactly like you. And see, and I never sat well with me, and the older I got and the more I studied, the more I really thought God was talking about our brotherhood of people.
Well, even Jesus said, "Other sheep have I that are not of this fold," or they said, "Hey, they're healing in your name, but they're not part of our group." And he said, "Hey, whoever's not against us is for us."
Well, the other thing is, I think God also has a very nice, beautiful way of challenging by being kind of humorous about it. In Spanish, grace and being humor or having a sense of humor, they're very close. And I think that's something that God does. God has a very nice sense of humor that even God will be able to put two enemies in a weird situation where they have to help each other. And I'm witnessing. I can give testimony of it, and it's true. So when this happened, what you gonna do? You have to deal with it.
You have to work
it's
together.
right there. It's right there.
It's funny
You know.
because I've often said, if you want God to challenge the limits of your love, put "just as you are" in the name of your church. Well, and I went to the concordance, and the definition or the description of the Greek word adelphos means a brother, a kinsman, a relative, one of the same nature or nation or nature. And this is the one I choose to grab. One of equal rank and dignity.
Yes.
Because I believe that we are all equal and we all deserve the same dignity.
And I want to share this little experience about that specifically. So there's a member of our community, and he probably, this person doesn't like me per se or whatever. There's something that is. And recently we were in a gathering, and at the end this person said to me, "Get out of here, don't come back here anymore." And then like a week after, this person was looking for something and necessarily entered into the room that I was and was asking for help. And certainly I give it. And this person has to be really humble about it because, that's what the weird situations that I'm thinking about it. And that's how I say God has a very great sense of humor. When you think that you're being enemy, that's the first person that is going to be right there with you in these kind of situations where you really have to deal with it and go the extra mile.
Well, when I started to reevaluate my belief system through Jesus saying, "Love God with every ounce of who you are and love others like you love yourself," and I think every application and interpretation needs to be filtered through those, because on those two rest everything else, is what he said. In Psalm 23, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies." And it was always, in my mind, it was like, it was like, "I've got the banquet, you don't." But now it was like, no, wait a minute. I'm sitting down at banquet with my enemies.
Yeah.
God brings reconciliation and peace, and that fits better really with Psalm 23 of still pastures and green waters, still waters and green pastures. There we go. So okay, so great. So we define other. I mean, we define the word adelphos as someone of equal rank and dignity. Others, people, anyone,
Right.
God's creation. Okay. So how do we live this out in our lives? I won't just like I'll open it up for you. There's a verse in Micah 6:8. He's told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Now I have a lot of verses here, but I think we may just not end, but this might just take the rest of the time. Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Now, personally, I'm not wired to be a political activist. I have marched. I have gone to the Capitol steps. It's just not the way I'm wired. I'm more of a political activist in a smaller way of one-on-one conversations of saying, why do you think this way? Not what's your problem, but to do justice or create justice, if you will, how do we live that out in a practical application of being a radically inclusive expression of God's love?
Well, I will speak of the many things that are happening, especially in the Hispanic community, especially with the undocumented people, that they don't have a voice, they don't have rights, they don't have so many things. But for me to do justice to those who are vulnerable, not only in the eyes of society, but in the eyes of the community and in the eyes of the church, and because they're not represented, and so that's where I go. I do go and accompany them when they have to go to court, when they have to go to do something that they will be afraid of dealing with authorities or things like that. That just to support them, letting them know, you're equal. Doesn't matter if you don't have a document that represents you, but you still have rights here in this country. You still have rights before God. You are God's child, and I will walk with you as far as I can. And I think that's doing justice, to those who are vulnerable and in the margins.
Because it's so easy to demonize.
Yes,
it is so easy to demonize the person that's not like us. I've seen that so many times and been on both sides of that. What about you?
Well, very similar, except for I think it goes even farther in that everywhere we go, we're faced with things that are not just. And it's where you go. It's how you behave in each interaction as it happens. You may have someone who has a special need or a special ability, and you have someone who you may know and be very close to who is deriding that person or treating that person badly. What are you going to do in that moment? Are you going to do the just thing, or are you going to do the comfortable thing? And I think that for me, that is it, is wherever the opportunity arises, whether it fits your comfort zone or not, you do the right thing, and you stand up for people who need somebody to stand up. You let them know you're fine. I hate to say it, but sometimes it's the person you're closest to, for lack of a better word, who's an idiot, and is behaving badly, and you got to stand up for the right thing. And I know that a lot of times that we use our own opinions as the definition for the right thing, and that's why we have so many people being cruel to each other. But if we use the do rightly, behave in a good manner toward people, as you just quoted, then you've kind of got a good level there.
To do justice. You said something that just in James, the first chapter of James, I don't know the numbers, but it's the last 2 verses. Pure religion that is undefiled, or pure religion is this, that to visit the widows and orphans in their distress, and to keep yourself undefiled or untainted by the world. And, to visit widows and orphans in their distress, I'm not going to open an orphanage, but if I was reading this book, and I wish I could remember the title exactly, but I think it was A History of Private Lives, and it talked about the during Jesus' time. Well, actually, it went through all history of the private lives of how life was to the real person, not the big history things that we usually read. And not to overstate it, but there were a couple things that just jumped out at me, that women had no voice, they were property, and that orphans would be those, the male head of household had the right to any child born in their household. It was called exposure. They could say, I don't want that child in my house. It would be put on the street to die, or it could be put on the steps of the Capitol as a political statement. Usually a kind-hearted person would come and pick that child up, but it was an orphan. It had no name for the rest of its life and had no rights. All of a sudden, that verse made sense to me, that true religion, pure religion is to speak for those who have no voice, and to help reach out, nurture those who have been discarded by society. There is a lot of that. There's a lot of people who are being discarded, in our society because of gender fluidity, because of political choices, because of social ideas, because
illnesses.
Illnesses.
Recently, just to confirm that, there were like 2 or 3 years ago, there was a lady who was with dementia, and she was forgetting everything, and her daughter was it was heartbreaking for me, because the daughter was just waiting for her to die. And I said, no, I have to be an advocate for those who don't have a voice, and this lady didn't have a voice, unconsciously. And I just went there and said, hey, if you don't take care of your mom, I will make sure that you do, or otherwise I had to. And then I had to step up with that sense of authority, saying, you have to do justice to this woman who's really needing the care.
Yeah.
So we took her into the hospital, and this lady was better than I was, And I was like, but the daughter was really mad at me. But I at some point, I don't care. But I knew that the hospital would take a very good care of her, and they will start. They start monitoring her more closely and things. So for me, it was a matter of dignity for this woman.
You reminded me, a teenager once said to me and Rory in a conversation, the church that we were going to at the time did a lot of work with people who were affected and infected with HIV. And she said, your church gives a lot of money to people with AIDS. And I said, well, it's not just that, it's people who are, let's get the whole broad spectrum, affected and infected with HIV. And she said, why? Well, because sometimes it's hard to get medications and there's issues like that. And she said, but they're going to die anyway. Why waste the money? I'm thinking, so it's not just an adult discarding, it's a mentality of that needs to be, that's to me is the challenge that we have as believers. It is to reignite and or maybe just kindle for the first time the love of God for the other in our lives. That's my challenge. So the next one is love kindness, not do kindness. Why do you think it says love kindness?
Because sometimes there is tough love that you really like. For example, to me, in the experience that I just shared, I think it's tough love. You have to be tough sometimes in order for love to show up. For love to be somehow protected.
Okay.
Somehow being if I love this woman who was dying, but how can I be really like in a position, firm position, to make that love to be for that person? And love kindness, I would say that that's the same thing. Sometimes it doesn't matter. You know, kindness is not like you're soft or you're smiley all the time. But sometimes there's that love. Kindness is, well, I'm here for you, and probably I'm not gonna be the smiley person or anything like that. But I know that what I'm giving it out of love.
Out of
You
love.
know,
What about
for
you?
the other person.
What is love kindness to you?
Well, to me, love is consistent. It doesn't change with emotion or anything. And when you said the difference between loving kindness or doing kindness, we can all do acts of kindness, do things that are kind, but without the consistency of love behind it.
So like First Corinthians, where it says you can give your body to be burned, you can give everything you own, but if there's no love, it's worthless.
Right.
Okay, so love kindness is having the good that we do motivated by the love of this woman who's ill or the love of the stranger that needs our help.
Yes.
Okay.
I had a ministry. It was a long time ago in a place that was not liked by very many people. I mean, we would have a Bible study in people's homes, and you could hear the gunshots out in the back and around. And I remember that the person in charge of all ministries came and talked to me once about it, and I was talking about the people that were involved. Wonderful people. Some are my friends now. I mean, we still communicate. I go see them, and they come visit us. Our kids know each other, and she looked at me and said, "You really love these people." And I looked at her, and I didn't say what was in my mind, but in my mind was going, "And you're in charge of ministry?" Yeah. And I said, "Of course I do. How else do you care for people if you can't love them? How can you take care of them or anything?" So
That's right. I resonate with your experience, even with priests, even I mean like colleagues, let's say. And I was like, I introduced to this person that's very humble, of didn't know how to read or write, from a native Guatemalan and blah, blah. And I said, please, we could help him, blah, blah. And at some point he was like, you really help these people. You really. I'm like, okay, well, they really like you. I was like, okay, I mean, like,
Actually, that goes back to before you got here and we turned the cameras on. Alex and I were talking about because after we leave here, we're going to go visit someone who's in the hospital, and it's very emotionally charged, and he said, why is that? And we were talking about how we get this emotional connection to the people with whom we minister, and we were sharing, and there was one point where we realized that there are many pastors who are very emotionally detached, and they're able to say, no, this is my job, and I shut it down right now. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, because we're all wired differently.
right.
And that might be their healthy way to maintain 100% ministry but for me, I can't turn it off. If I go on a cruise with my church people, I'm not going to say, no, church, you can't talk to me. But I will carve out time where I can be by myself.
Right.
But I'll always be Pastor Jeff. I mean, it was very that's exactly the same thing we were talking about.
It's like, once you're a follower of Christ, once you're a follower of Jesus, that's a 24/7 thing. It's like, and you live in the tension, and you live in the struggle, and sometimes it's like, okay, that struggle that Jesus talks about in the gospel, that if your friend comes at 3 in the morning asking you for help, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing I think Jesus is giving that's kindness, and that's acts of kindness, and we do it, and I think we do it. It's very embedded in our way of being. We do those out of kindness, those acts of kindness for family members. We do it for a child who is like crying in the middle of the night, asking to be changed, or to asking for to be fed.
So it's
So
a
we
matter of
do that.
expanding that
Yes,
boundary
yes,
beyond
yes,
that
yes,
to
yes,
the
yes,
other.
yes.
Well, it's interesting because I wrote a note here that fits kind of how we're headed here. Is radically inclusive is not the requirement; it's the result of being transformed by our faith, which is exactly what you're saying. Which I also think fits the last part of Micah, walk humbly with your God. I think that's when the transformation happens, is in that communal, humble walk with God. So I'm going to start with Cheryl. How do you, because really this is not a right or wrong, this is, because we're all wired differently, how do you walk humbly with God? Because someone might need to hear exactly how you do it to be encouraged in their faith journey.
I walk step by step, I really do, every day, step by step. There have been a long time ago, I didn't, humble is a hard word, because he who thinks they're humble really are not, you know?
Okay, so let's take that out of the equation. How do you nurture your walk with God? Is that an easier way to
Yeah.
answer? Okay.
Yeah, I wrote a poem a long time ago, step by step, day by day, following God's way. And I've changed it from step by step to moment by moment. And in every moment, just savoring. And literally, once you start doing that, every moment you just savor who God is and what he has in front of you. And keep walking. And when those things come up and you step out of who you really want to be in him, then you say, whoa, here I am. And instead of beating yourself up, you keep walking. And you keep recognizing that no matter who you meet, no matter what position they're in, when God met me, I was a mess. A complete and total mess, and yet he took me exactly as I was and loved me. And so he still takes me. He knows what I'm going to do in the next 50 years. He knows what I'm going to do, good and bad. And yet he still takes me in, all of him. And I try to walk that way. Does that make sense?
Very much so. What about you, Alex? How do you nurture that?
Well, it's I agree with you. I mean, it's taking moment by moment, because there are many moments in our lives that we would rather say, I don't want to be here. But God has bring you to that moment for some reason, you know, for a learning experience. I truly believe that we are eternal learners of the will of God, and so we have to just situate ourselves in that time and space and say, what is it? What is my soul feeling? You know, what is my spirit telling me? You know, why? How is it that I'm open to this moment that could be a moment of grace? You know, even though I'm feeling uncomfortable. You know, and I'm follower of Jesus. You know, I'm meant to be uncomfortable. I'm meant to be out of my comfort zone. And so that's how I walk. You know, when I sometimes when I walk in the procession, the entrance procession, you know, in the mass, I know that not not everybody loves me. I know that people would be uncomfortable with my presence. I'm pretty aware of that, and I'm glad that the ones that are there, because we together, despite our differences, we walk together towards God, and we're here to worship God, despite our differences or our quarrels or our, you know. And I think that's what it's humbling, is that you are there and you humble yourself before God and said, yes, I'm proud of this, proud of this, proud of this. I am not happy with this person here or this person there. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We're here for God, and so we surrender.
Surrender to the love.
Yes, and that's it.
Surrender to the love.
Yes.
Savor the presence. I'd have to say, and just bringing everything down to a close because I know we're out of time. For me, my transformation really started to blossom, if you will, when my time of prayer, which is pray without ceasing, but when my prayers became more about listening than speaking to God. So There's three good ways to nurture our humble walk with God. One is savor the presence, surrender to the love, and listen more than you speak. So, well, that's a good conversation. I always appreciate
Thank you.
having us all together here. So, hopefully you enjoyed it as well. Let us know in the comments below, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, I'm Pastor Jeff. May God be with you.